In the beginning, when the mountains still breathed and the sea still spoke, there were no names for men, only the whispers of gods and the rhythm of storms. From the mist of the highlands came a woman of light, whose heart belonged to the wind. From the depths of the sea rose a dragon lord, crowned by thunder and waves. When their paths crossed, the world trembled, and from their union came 100 lives, each destined to shape a nation born of both storm and soil. But unity never comes without sacrifice. Between water and mountain, love became legend, and legend became the blood that runs through every child of Vietnam. This is not just a myth, it is the memory of a people who refuse to vanish. This is the story of Lac Long, Quan, and Âu Co, and the birth of a nation. Before names, before dates, there was only the trembling hush where mountain met tide. Dawn bled through river mist, and the land inhaled like a living chest ridges rising as ribs, mangrove veins drinking the first light. The people were few then, scattered along the braided mouths of a river that changed its mind each season. They walked on silt that remembered every footstep and forgot none, and they learned to listen to the slow grammar of water. A pause in the current meant safety. A sudden swirl meant grief. They were children of rain. They stilted their homes on legs of timber and tied their granaries like boats, for the river was as generous as it was faithless. In good months, it left black milk in the fields, and rice took root like a soft-spoken miracle. In bad months, the river climbed the ladders of their houses and pressed its cold face against the door. They did not curse it. They bargained with it, like kin at odds. Women counted moons, men read the backs of clouds. They bartered fish for bronze and bronze for salt. At the heart of each settlement stood a drum of hammered dawn, its skin stretched tight with stories. When the drum spoke, even the herons turned their heads. The elders said the drum remembered storms older than the oldest grandmother, and when struck in a certain rhythm, the waters leaned in to listen. Between the highlands and the sea lay an in-between world of reeds and mirrors. From the uplands, lean hunters brought down wind-bruised deer. From the estuaries, netcasters came home shining with scales. They met on the tongue of an island that appeared at low tide and vanished by afternoon. There they traded and joked and sometimes quarreled, and sometimes, as the river decreed, they loved. Babies were named for tides and hill flowers alike, and their laughter carried 2 accents at once. Yet beneath this weaving of daily mercies there lived a restlessness, a sensation that the earth was not only ground but vow. The old woman with the river-colored eyes told it best. She would sweep a circle in the dust and set a cup of water at its center. "Sky above, mountain around, water within," she murmured. "We stand at the edge of a promise." The children leaned close. "What promise?" She smiled without teeth. "That nothing divided will remain so." The first omen came as a silence. Birds deserted the reeds, and the frogs swallowed their own songs. The air grew heavy, smelling of iron and ripe fruit. Far off, the mountain line flickered as if a hand had smudged the horizon. Then the tide returned out of season, dragging a silver bruise across the river's skin. The elders struck the drum, and the sound went walking over the water. On that day a child waded into the shallows and found, half buried in silt, a scale that held the sunrise in its curve. She lifted it, and a ripple climbed her arm like a question. In the highlands, another child knelt beside a spring and heard, rising from the stones, a breath that matched his own. 2 small wonders, one of water, one of mountain, and neither knew the other existed. Yet the old woman's circle brightened in the dust. Night fell with the patience of a teacher. Stars came forward like elders taking their seats. The river exhaled, and the mountain answered. Somewhere between them, in that truce of darkness, a path began to draw itself thin, as a reed at first, then sure as a road. Those who kept the drums felt their palms warming. Those who kept the fields felt their feet aligning with a step they had not learned. And the wind, slipping between house legs and rice stems, carried a whisper that would one day be a name. So the people slept, not knowing that the story had already turned, that sky and water were no longer strangers, that a meeting had been promised before the first word was spoken. In the hush before dawn, the tide paused, the mountain listened, and the world took a breath it would be telling for 1,000 years. Dawn returned like an old debt, slow and golden. Mist rose from the slopes, curling around the trunks of ancient trees that had seen the birth of fire. In the cradle of the highlands, the earth was restless. Springs erupted from stones, streams cut new paths through sleeping roots, and the air thrummed with a pulse older than time. Among the cliffs there lived a clan who called themselves the Children of Stone. They believed the mountain had veins like a body, and in its deepest heart burned a flame that fed the sun. They built homes on terraces and carved faces of ancestors into the rock so that the living might speak with the dead when the fog came down. From this clan came a boy with eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He was not like the others. When the wind changed direction, he could feel it in his blood. When lightning struck the ridge, he did not run, he listened. The elders whispered that he was born beneath a comet, a child promised to both earth and sky. They called him Long, though he would not learn the rest of his name until years later. Long grew quickly, tall and silent, walking barefoot along cliffs where others feared to look down. The mountain taught him patience, how to wait for stone to speak, how to read the moods of moss, how to sense when the sky's weight was about to break. But one morning, as the valley trembled under distant thunder, Long saw something that changed him forever. Far below, a white mist glided through the valley floor, curling like a living creature. Within it flickered scales of light, and when the wind parted the veil, he saw a figure, a shadow, with wings that glistened like the inside of a shell. The creature rose, twisting once in the air before vanishing into the clouds. The ground shuddered beneath his feet. For a moment, the mountain seemed to exhale. That night, he dreamt of rivers glowing in the dark and of voices calling his name from beneath the water. When he awoke, the mountain was silent, and the spring near his home had turned warm as breath. The elders said the mountain had chosen him, but for what? They could not say. Long began to wander farther, beyond the terraces, to the edge where stone met sky. He found an ancient cave hidden by vines. Inside, carvings covered the walls, spirals, dragons, and eyes that watched from the dark. At the cave's heart, water dripped into a shallow pool, forming ripples that never ceased. When he leaned close, he saw not his reflection but the face of a being vast and luminous, its gaze deep as the sea. The voice spoke not in words but in thunder rolling through bone. When the tide meets the peak, the world will be whole again. The mountain shook. A wind rushed through the cave, tearing the vines from its mouth and scattering them into the sky. Long staggered outside, clutching his chest, where the words had burned themselves into his pulse. From that day, he carried the sound of the mountain within him, the low hum that could stir clouds and bend rain. Seasons passed, the boy became a man. Hunters who met him on the ridge said the storms followed where he walked. When he struck his staff against the ground, springs opened. When he shouted across the valley, birds fell silent. Yet he was lonely, for the mountain's song was not enough. He often stood on the highest peak and looked toward the east, where the horizon shimmered blue. He felt something calling him from beyond those waters, a whisper older even than the mountain's heart. One night, as a crimson moon climbed the sky, a gust carried with it the smell of salt and unknown rain. Long lifted his head. From far away came the echo of waves breaking against invisible shores. The call returned soft, insistent, and familiar. The mountain's breath met the ocean's sigh. And in that meeting of air and water, fate began to draw its first true circle. The sea was awake long before men learned to dream. Its body shifted and shimmered, a vast creature made of breath and memory. Beneath the surface, coral kingdoms glowed like embers, and schools of silver fish danced in spirals that mirrored the stars above. In those depths ruled the Dragon Lord, sovereign of tides, keeper of storms, whose laughter could stir tempests and whose silence could still the ocean floor. He was born from lightning striking water, a union of chaos and order. His name was Quan, though few dared speak it aloud. The sea obeyed his moods. When he stirred, waves rose like walls. When he sighed, the currents bent their heads. Yet even for a being born of power, solitude was a chain. His palace of coral and jade was endless, yet it echoed only with his own voice. Quan often swam upward, seeking the boundary between his world and the realm above. There, where sunlight fractured into shards, he watched shadows of men moving along the shore. They built fires, sang to invisible gods, and fought the floods that tried to reclaim their homes. Each time he watched, something stirred within him, a pulse not of sea, but of earth. One night he rose higher than ever before. The moon hung low, a silver gate. As he broke the surface, he saw the world of air for the first time, mountains sleeping like giants, forests murmuring under the stars, rivers coiling like dragons made of glass. And then he heard it, a sound unlike any he had known. It was not the thunder of storms, nor the roar of the tide, but a hum, steady, solemn, and deep. It came from the mountains far away. The sound called to him like kin. The voice beneath the waves met the breath of the stones. For the first time, the Dragon Lord felt incomplete. He swam to the delta, where river and sea embraced. There he lingered, unseen, feeling the pulse of the land. The people who lived there told stories of a spirit who tamed crocodiles and taught them to plant rice. They called him the Lord of the Deep, half in fear, half in faith. And Quan, curious, walked among them disguised as a wanderer. He saw hunger, hope, and defiance. He saw the struggle of life between floods and harvests. And in their eyes, he found something missing in his own, a quiet fire that no tide could drown. Yet his heart still belonged to the sea, and he could not stay long. Each time he returned to the ocean, the silence pressed heavier on his scales. He would close his eyes and hear again that distant hum, the song of the mountain that vibrated within his chest. The two voices, sea and stone, echoed in him until they became one. Then, one dawn, as mist crawled over the delta, the sea whispered a warning. The tides would soon rise higher than before. The old balance was breaking. The Dragon Lord looked toward the horizon, where mountains kissed the clouds. Somewhere there, he felt the presence of another, neither god nor mortal, but born of air and light. He spread his wings of water and thunder and ascended toward that unknown. The sea roared behind him as if urging him forward. Above, the mountain waited, breathing slowly, calling his name without knowing it. And so the dragon rose, the mountain breathed, and between them the world held its breath, poised on the edge of the first meeting that would change its destiny forever. The tide moved, the wind turned, and somewhere beyond sight, a woman of mist opened her eyes. At the edge of the highlands, where the clouds descended to kiss the forests, there lived a people who spoke to the wind. They called themselves the Sky Weavers, for they built their homes on cliffs that brushed the heavens, and their songs could travel farther than arrows. Every dawn, their priestesses stood barefoot in dew, lifting their palms to the first light, whispering prayers older than memory. Among them was a girl unlike any other. She was born on a morning when frost and thunder shared the same breath, a child of contradiction, wrapped in white silk and silence. The elders named her Auker, meaning the spirit who came from the clouds. From her first steps, she moved as if she remembered the path before it was made. When she laughed, the wind changed direction. When she cried, fog gathered on the mountain's face. The people said she was blessed, perhaps too blessed. The shaman who read omens in bird bones warned, "The sky will not keep what belongs to the earth." But no one truly understood. They only knew that wherever Auker went, the world seemed to follow her rhythm. The flowers turned when she passed, and the rain held its breath above her hair. She grew among the whispering pines, learning the craft of medicine and song. Her hands healed wounds with herbs, her voice calmed beasts in the storm. Yet inside her something stirred an ache, a question she could not name. At night, while others slept, she would climb to the highest ridge and stare eastward toward the horizon that trembled with blue light. She did not know what she sought, only that her heart beat faster when the sea wind touched her face. One evening, as twilight draped the mountains, Okur heard a sound she had never known before. It came from far below, deep and patient, a low hum that rolled through the roots of the peaks. It was not thunder, though it carried power, not song, though it carried meaning. She knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. The mountain was breathing. A vision opened before her eyes. She saw rivers winding like serpents of glass, saw a man with eyes like stormlight and scales hidden beneath his skin, walking between the waves. She gasped and stumbled back, her pulse echoing that same rhythm. When she looked up, the sky was trembling with distant lightning, though no rain fell. For days she wandered in silence, haunted by that image. The elders saw her drifting from her tasks and whispered that the spirits had touched her. They spoke of balance, that heaven and earth must never merge too closely. But Okur felt no fear. Somewhere beyond the clouds and the tides, a destiny was calling her name. One night she dreamt of standing at the edge of the world, where mountain met ocean. The mist parted, and a figure of light rose from the waves. His gaze was neither fierce nor gentle but eternal, like the horizon itself. When he spoke, his voice was both thunder and whisper. "You are the breath I have waited for," he said. She awoke, trembling, her lips wet with salt as if she had tasted the sea. The sky outside her window pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The mountains no longer felt silent, they were listening. The next morning, when the first rays broke through the fog, Okur began her descent from the highlands, following the path carved by rivers and wind. The elders called after her, but she did not turn back. The prophecy had begun to stir, and the mountain had already released its daughter. Down below, the tide was rising, carrying with it the scent of thunder and the waiting heart of a dragon. The river opened its arms to the sea, and the wind turned heavy with salt. Far down the delta, a storm gathered not of rain but of longing. From the depths rose the dragon lord, his scales gleaming with lightning, his breath tasting of thunder. Above him the clouds thinned, revealing the rim of the mountains. For the first time, the two realms saw each other clearly. On a ledge of stone stood Okur, hair unbound, garments trembling in the rising wind. She had followed the whisper that haunted her sleep, the voice that had promised meaning beyond the clouds. When she looked down, she saw the water stir as though it recognized her. The surface parted, and from the heart of the storm emerged a figure crowned in light. Their eyes met across the trembling air, his filled with the memory of oceans, hers with the calm of the sky. The world seemed to hold its breath. Trees bent without breaking, and the waves fell silent. The mountain drum began to beat on its own, each strike a heartbeat shared by both land and sea. Okur stepped closer to the edge, unafraid. "Who calls me from the deep?" she asked, her voice a thread of silver. The dragon lord rose higher, the water cascading from his shoulders like rain returning home. "The one who was meant to," he answered. His voice rolled through the valley, soft yet vast. "I have wandered through storms and silence to find the breath that would steady the sea." When his hand reached out, mist curled between them like a living bridge. She took it, and warmth surged through the wind. Around them, thunder dissolved into music. For a heartbeat, they were neither mortal nor divine, only two halves of a promise finally kept. The sky lowered to kiss the tide lifted to meet the sky. Rain fell, gentle and bright, blessing the soil and the foam alike. Where their palms met, light bloomed a spiral of gold that rose above the mountain peaks and sank into the river mouths. The people below saw it and knelt, They said a new age had begun, that the spirits of mountain and sea had found harmony. They lit fires on hilltops, sent lanterns down the streams, and sang names they did not yet know, the dragon and the fairy, the father and the mother. By nightfall, the storm had vanished. The air smelled of renewal, of earth washed clean. Quan looked upon Auker and felt the ache of centuries ease within him. She smiled, and the stars drew nearer. Thus began the season of union, the breath of the mountain mingling with the voice beneath the waves, the seed of a nation waiting in silence to be born. Night came, dressed in silver rain. Beneath a sky of scattered stars, the Dragon Lord and the Sky Maiden stood where mountain roots met the sea. The horizon was neither land nor water, but something between a living pulse that bound both worlds together. Quan's gaze softened. "I have seen the rise and fall of tides," he said, "but never the stillness you bring." Auker touched the air before him, and where her fingers passed, droplets froze into shimmering beads of light. "And I have watched clouds wander endlessly," she replied, "until today, when they finally found a home." They walked together along the shore. Wherever their feet touched, the sand turned to pearl, and the wind curled around them like silk. The sea whispered their names, the mountain echoed them back, and for a moment all creation hummed in a single note. At dawn, the world awoke renewed. The river ran clearer, the forests bloomed as if spring had remembered its first promise. The people of the valley found strange marks burned into stone spirals shaped like scales, blossoms that never faded. The elders said it was a sign heaven and earth had met, and life itself had been rewritten. In the days that followed, the Dragon Lord taught the people of the Delta how to master the floods. He raised the first dikes, showing them how to speak to the water rather than fear it. Auker descended among the hill tribes, teaching them the medicine of leaves and the way to read the stars. Their lessons spread like dawn, and for a time, harmony reigned. But peace is a fragile child. The tide must fall as it rises, and no union lasts without trial. Whispers stirred among the spirits, some envied, others feared. The gods of storm and soil watched from afar, uneasy at the merging of realms. Still, for now, love held its ground. In a cave carved by wind and wave, the Dragon Lord built a palace of coral and jade. There, beneath lanterns that burned with eternal fire, he and Auker joined as one. The night their vows were spoken, lightning crowned the sea, and 1,000 lotus petals fell from the sky. The people said the heavens themselves had bowed to witness. The wind carried a new name across the valleys. The union of storm and blossom, the promise that would birth 100 generations. And so, from that sacred bond, the story of a nation began to breathe. The mountains slept easier, the sea sang softer, and in the heart of both, a new rhythm was born, the rhythm of Vietnam's first heartbeat. Seasons turned like pages of an unseen book. The mountain snows melted into rivers, and the sea sang lullabies to the shore. In the cave of coral and wind, where light rippled through the walls like moving silk, Auker lay resting, her palms over a warmth that glowed within her. The air trembled faintly, as if the world itself held its breath. Quan stood beside her, his eyes filled with something deeper than wonder, an understanding that this moment was older than both their names. When he touched her hand, he felt the pulse of a new rhythm, soft and steady, like rain beginning to fall. "They are stirring," she whispered. "I can feel them dream." Days passed. The tides rose and fell in quiet ceremony. The creatures of the deep brought gifts, shells, pearls, seaweed, bright as emerald, to honor the mother of life. From the mountains came the winds, carrying the scent of wildflowers and smoke from village fires. Nature itself conspired in reverence. Then, one dawn, when the sea was a mirror of pale gold, a sound echoed through the cave, a low hum that became a song. Beneath Auker's hands, light gathered and solidified into a single, luminous shape, an egg, enormous and radiant, warm as a heartbeat. She gasped, for the glow did not fade. Instead, the egg multiplied. 1 became 2, 2 became 10, and soon the cave blazed with the light of 100 eggs. Each egg shimmered with a different hue, some the color of rivers after rain, others the deep jade of mountains or the white of dawn mist. The Dragon Lord watched, speechless, as the 100 spheres of life pulsed in harmony, their glow filling even the darkest corners of the sea. For 100 days and nights, the world waited. Fishermen who ventured near the bay claimed to see lights beneath the waves and hear lullabies drifting through the mist. Crops grew taller, rains gentler, beasts calmer. It was as if the very balance of the earth had tilted toward mercy. On the 100th dawn, thunder rolled without clouds. The cave quaked, cracks of light burst through the water's surface, and one by one, the eggs began to break. From within each came not dragons, not spirits, but children human, yet touched by divinity. The firstborn had the eyes of storms, the second bore the mark of a cloud on his shoulder, another's skin shimmered faintly as though scaled with light. 50 sons and 50 daughters emerged, each unique, each carrying a spark of both water and sky. Aukur wept as she gathered them. "They are the colors of the world," she said. "No two the same, yet all born from the same song." Quan knelt beside her. "They are the bond of 2 realms," he said. "When the mountain and the sea forget their quarrels, these children will remind them of what we once were." For a time, joy reigned. The 100 children grew swiftly, their laughter echoing across valleys and waves. They built houses upon stilts and carved symbols into stone, marking the places where mountain wind met sea spray. They learned to fish and to farm, to build and to sing. In every gesture, the legacy of their parents shone through. But even paradise cannot remain untouched by longing. The Dragon Lord began to feel the pull of the tides once more. His eyes, once filled with dawn, now searched the horizon at dusk. The sea whispered his name, calling him home. Aukur saw it in his silence. "You are leaving," she said softly. He turned to her, sorrow and love entwined in his gaze. "The sea is restless, it will not sleep without me, but my heart remains here." She nodded, though her breath trembled. "And what of the children? They belong to both of us," he said. "Half of them will walk with you into the mountains to guard the heart of the earth. The other half will come with me beneath the waves to keep the ocean's peace. They will remember each other always." That night, as moonlight spilled over the water, they gathered their children and spoke of parting. The eldest bowed to both parents and swore an oath. "Though we walk different paths, our blood is one. When the mountain calls, the sea will answer. When the sea weeps, the mountain will echo." At dawn, they embraced for the last time. 50 children followed Aukur into the highlands, their steps lighting the ridges with morning fire. 50 followed Quan into the sea, their songs turning the waves silver. Between them lay the land that would one day be called Viet, cradled between mountain and water, heaven and earth. Aukur looked back once and saw the ocean gleam like a mirror. She raised her hand in farewell. Far below, the Dragon Lord rose from the waves, his form vast and gleaming, a shadow of light upon the sea. For a moment, the world was whole. Then he vanished beneath the surface, and the tides rolled gently toward her feet, as if bowing to the mother of a nation. The winds stilled, the sky quieted. From the silence grew a whisper that has never died. "Children of the mountain and the sea, remember who you are." The sun had barely risen when the valley learned what loss meant. The mist hung heavy over the trees, as though the heavens themselves hesitated to begin another day. Aukur stood upon a ridge of stone, her hair unbound and eyes turned toward the endless blue that had swallowed her beloved. Below, her 50 children clung to the path, each carrying a token left by their father, a scale, a pearl, a drop of hardened light that pulsed faintly in their palms. Behind her, the mountains were waiting. They called softly, the way mothers call to children returning home. But her heart trembled, for half of it was still beneath the waves. Days passed into moons, and moons into years. In the highlands, Auker built villages where the air smelled of pine and new earth. The children grew strong, weaving bamboo houses that clung to cliffs like nests of light. They learned to farm the narrow valleys, to speak with the forest spirits, to coax life from stone and rain. And each night, when fires burned low, Auker told them stories of their father, the Dragon Lord, who ruled beneath the sea, who breathed thunder, who loved the earth enough to let it go. Far below, the sea people built their own world. Under coral domes and glowing caves, the sons and daughters of Quan sang to whales and tamed storms. Their laughter was carried upward in bubbles that burst upon the surface as silver foam. Yet even there, amid the deep's glory, they remembered the songs of the mountain wind. Some nights, when the tides were calm, they swore they could hear their mother's voice drifting through the current. The years moved like tides, pulling memories back and forth. The bond between mountain and sea thinned but never broke. The mountain tribes began to craft bronze drums, whose echoes could travel miles, symbols of thunder, of the dragon's voice. When the drums were struck, the sea answered with waves that struck the shore in rhythm. It was their way of speaking across the distance, of reminding one another that their blood was one. But time, as always, reshaped devotion into story, and story into myth. New generations were born that had never seen both realms at once. Some questioned if the other half truly existed. Children of the mountains laughed at the idea of palaces beneath the sea. Children of the tides doubted that mortals could live so high and far from water. Pride crept in quietly, like fog across a sleeping bay. Auker aged gently, her beauty fading into something quieter, like sunlight in winter. She spent her evenings staring toward the horizon, whispering names only she remembered. One night, while her people danced beside the fires, she wandered to a cliff where clouds met stars. A storm brewed beyond the sea, flashing like a heartbeat in the dark. For a moment, she thought she saw him again, the gleam of scales beneath lightning, the curve of a smile carved from memory. "Have you forgotten me?" she whispered into the wind. From far below came a single wave, climbing higher than any before, rising until it kissed the rocks at her feet. It broke not in fury, but in reverence. The water glittered, and within it she saw a reflection of herself, younger, radiant, unbroken. The sea had not forgotten. She closed her eyes and wept, but her tears were not of sorrow. They fell into the waves and became pearls, the tears of a mother who knew that love was greater than distance, stronger than death, older than both mountain and ocean. When the storm passed, her people found her standing at the edge of dawn. The air shimmered around her like breath on glass. She turned to them and said, "Do not mourn what has been divided. The world must remain in balance. But remember this, when you hear the sea in your dreams or the thunder on your peaks, know that it is your kin calling your name." Then she lifted her arms toward the sky, and the clouds parted. A great wind swept through the valley, scattering petals and ash, carrying her words across the land and the waves beyond. From that day, when storms rise from the east and echo through the mountains, the people say it is the dragon and the fairy speaking once more, reminding their children of the promise they made before the world was old. And thus, the legend endured not as myth, but as a memory shaped by love, a truth whispered from tide to stone. The blood of the dragon flows in every heart that remembers, and the breath of the fairy lives in every voice that calls this land home. Years rolled forward like quiet rivers, carving their way through both mountain and tide. The world had changed, forests thickened, rivers stretched farther, and the descendants of Auker and Quan spread across the land like seeds caught in the wind. From the high ridges to the wide deltas, they built villages where smoke curled gently from thatched roofs and drums spoke to the heavens. Yet they all carried one thing in common, a memory older than words. Even those who had never seen the sea would pause at the sound of waves. Even those who lived by the coast would bow their heads when thunder echoed in the mountains. Something deep within their blood recognized that call, as if the pulse of the dragon and the breath of the fairy still shaped the rhythm of their hearts. The eldest among the mountain tribes became chieftains, keepers of flame and song. They wore necklaces of stone and teeth, each piece telling a story of storms survived. They taught that strength was not only in the arm but in patience, that a man must learn from earth how to endure. Down in the deltas, the water people became masters of flood and field. They bent the rivers with dikes, tamed the tides, and planted rice that glistened like small moons. Between harvests, they told tales of their father who commanded the waves, and their mother who whispered to clouds. For a time, harmony reigned. The sky was gentle, the rains just, and the land generous. But as generations passed, the memory of divine kinship began to fade into myth. New leaders rose, men born of ambition, eyes sharp as flint. They saw not the union that made them one people, but the differences that could divide them. The mountain clans claimed the highlands as their inheritance, saying, "We are of stone and wind, the lowlands belong to others." The waterfolk answered, "The sea gives life to all. Why should we bow to those who breathe thin air?" Thus the first shadows of discord slipped between them, faint as mist, yet dangerous as fire under dry leaves. When storms came, the rivers swelled higher than before. Floods carried away crops, and landslides tore through the valleys. The elders said it was punishment, the ancestors weeping that their children had forgotten the vow of unity. And in every thunderclap, some swore they heard a voice, the dragons crying out in warning. One night, as the sky split open with lightning, an old woman among the tribes lit a fire and spoke to her people. "Listen to the storm. It is not anger, it is remembrance." She raised her hands, and her voice carried through the howling wind. "We are not two peoples. We are one breath, divided only by pride. The mountain and the sea must learn again to meet, or the land will drown in silence." The next morning, the storm was gone, and a strange calm followed. Across the valleys and along the coast, survivors emerged to rebuild. Without needing command, the mountain folk descended with tools and timber, while the sea folk brought food and salt. Together they rebuilt the ruined villages. When the work was done, they shared one fire and one meal. That night, a child born of both lineages, a girl with hair dark as river mud and eyes bright as morning mist, sang a song no one had taught her. It was soft, wordless, and old. The people listened in awe. When she finished, an elder wept and said, "That song, it is the song of the 100 eggs." Word spread. Villages gathered to honor the child's voice. They carved new drums whose rhythm matched her melody. They planted a single tree in the valley, its roots drinking from river water, its branches brushing the mountain clouds. They named it Koi Nuon, the root of origin. And from that tree, they declared, would grow one people. In the years that followed, stories changed shape, but never spirit. They called their land Van Lang, and its people Lakviet, the children of the dragon and the fairy. Their kings traced lineage to the 100 eggs, their rituals to the joining of sky and tide. And though empires would one day rise and fall upon this soil, each would still claim descent from that sacred union. For every flood that followed, for every drought or war, when despair seemed endless, the people turned their faces toward both the sea and the mountains. They whispered the same prayer their ancestors once spoke: "May the Father's strength guard us. May the Mother's breath guide us. And may we never forget that we were born of both storm and peace." Thus, from myth became memory, and from memory became nation. The tale of Auker and Lac Long Quan was not merely a legend, it was the heartbeat of a people who refused to be erased, a song carried in the veins of every child who called that land home. And somewhere beyond the clouds and waves, two spirits watched over them still, one wrapped in mist, the other in light, whispering the same vow they made when the world was young. Wherever our children walk, there too will be the meeting of sky and sea. Centuries passed, and the children of the 100 eggs multiplied. The land between the mountains and the sea blossomed with villages that pulsed like constellations upon the earth. Smoke from cooking fires rose each dawn, mingling with the mist of rivers, and the sound of drums, those ancient voices of the dragon and the fairy, echoed from valley to shore. The people learned to shape the breath of the mountain and the rhythm of the tide into craft and ritual. From river clay, they molded pots painted with spirals of wind and waves. From copper and tin, they forged the first bronze that caught the sun and turned it into music. The drum became their heart, the thunder of ancestors made solid. When struck, it carried through the forests and plains, calling scattered tribes to gather, to remember they were one. In these days, chieftains arose, men and women chosen not only for strength, but for the fire of memory that lived in their voices. Among them was one whose spirit burned brighter than all. His name was Hung, said to be the son of the eldest descendant of Auker, born with a mark shaped like a spiral on his chest. He could lift a spear as if it were a reed, and when he spoke, the air trembled. The tribes called upon Hung when floods devoured their fields, when strange invaders came from the northern valleys with iron blades and foreign gods. He listened to their cries and gathered the clans on the banks of the Red River. There, standing barefoot upon the mud, he lifted his hand toward the horizon and said, "From the mountains, our mother watches. From the sea, our father listens. If we are truly their blood, we must stand as one land, not 100 scattered names." That night, a great council fire burned. The flame bent neither east nor west, as if held still by unseen breath. Elders whispered that the spirits had returned to witness, and so, before both sky and river, the tribes placed their bronze drums in a circle and swore allegiance beneath the stars. They named Hung their king, and his realm they called Văn Lang, the first cradle of a people that would one day be called Viet. Peace followed, but it was a peace that demanded vigilance. The mountain tribes brought salt and metal down the ridges. The lowland farmers carried rice and fish up to the hills. Roads of earth were carved through jungles, and stilted towns rose beside river mouths, their pillars engraved with symbols of coiling dragons. The kingdom breathed like a living creature, its pulse steady, its lungs the wind of the mountains and the tide of the sea. Yet no world born of men can remain untouched by shadow. Beyond the northern frontier, whispers carried tales of empires, rising of kings who wore gold masks and soldiers who marched in endless lines. Their greed stretched like smoke across the mountains. Messengers came bearing warnings. Iron was coming, and with it, conquest. King Hung summoned his people once more. Upon the sacred plain of Fengshao, he struck the great bronze drum. Its thunder rolled from peak to ocean, shaking leaves and hearts alike. "Remember the vow," he said. "When the mountain calls, the sea must answer. When the sea weeps, the mountain must rise." From that moment, every village prepared. Smiths forged spears whose tips gleamed like lightning. Women wove armor from bamboo and bark. Children carried stones to the riverbanks to build walls that could defy the flood or the foe. But Hung was wise. He knew that the greatest strength was not in weapons, but in unity. He ordered the drums to sound together at dusk each day, so that no matter where one lived among cliffs or marshes, every heart beat to the same rhythm. The air itself became their bond. Then came the night when the sky turned red. Fires flared beyond the northern border, and the wind carried the scent of iron and fear. The invaders had crossed the mountains. Their blades glimmered like fangs in moonlight. The first war of the Viet people had begun. In that hour, the descendants of Auker and Lac Long Quan stood shoulder to shoulder. Warriors painted their bodies with ash and river clay, singing to the spirits of storm and rain. The drums thundered from every valley, and the sea answered with waves that crashed against the northern cliffs. And from far beneath those waves, deep within his palace of coral, the Dragon Lord stirred. His eyes opened, bright as dawn upon steel. He looked toward the land that bore his children and whispered through the current, "The time has come for the blood of the 100 eggs to remember." Then he rose, unseen, riding the tide toward the shore. The wind carried his voice to the mountains, where Oker's spirit heard and wept not with sorrow, but with pride. Her children had become what they were meant to be. Between thunder and tide, between blade and storm, the birth of a nation would be written in bronze and blood. The wind came before the enemy did. It swept through the valleys like an omen, bending the rice fields flat and setting the bamboo groves whispering in fear. Every village felt it, the same tremor that once signaled the birth of the world, now warning of its trial. From mountain caves to the mouths of the Red River, people stopped their work and listened. In the stillness, the first drum struck. The sound came from Fong Shao, the sacred heart of the land. It was deep and low, like the mountain's own breath, a call that crossed forests and rivers, carrying through the ribs of the earth. Then another answered from the coast, bright and sharp as the cry of the tide. Soon, every drum in Văn Lang joined the chorus, until the whole land thundered with the rhythm of unity. King Hung stood at the center of the plain, his bronze armor glinting with the color of dawn. Around him gathered the chieftains, men of the uplands, women of the river plains, youths whose eyes burned with the same stormlight that had once lived in their ancestors. At his side stood the oldest drum of all, carved with spirals of clouds and serpents, Nok Loi, the drum of heaven's promise. When he raised his spear, the drums fell silent. "Our fathers were born from the sea," Hung said, his voice carrying even without wind. "Our mothers from the mountain, the land between them, is ours not to rule, but to guard. If we fall, the rivers will forget their course, and the mountains will forget their names." The people answered not with words, but with a single beat of the drum, so powerful that even the birds dropped from the sky in awe. Then the enemy came. They crossed through the northern passes, men of iron, their faces pale, their language harsh like stones breaking. They carried banners dyed with blood and fire, believing themselves unstoppable. But when they reached the first valley, they found no fear, only silence. Then, from the mist, came the sound of flutes made of bone and bamboo, playing a melody that wound through the trees like smoke. It was not music for comfort. It was a warning. Arrows whistled from the ridges, spears rained from the cliffs. The first invader fell before he even saw who struck him. The war had begun, not with chaos, but with rhythm, the rhythm of the drums. Each battlefield became a dance between thunder and silence. When the enemy pushed forward, the drums quickened. When they faltered, the sound grew slow and deep, like the turning of the earth. The warriors of Văn Lang fought as though guided by invisible hands, moving together, retreating together, striking together. It was said that even the river shifted its flow to aid them, flooding valleys to swallow the invaders' chariots. For days the fighting burned across the land. Villages rose in flames, yet from the ashes new defenders emerged. Women carried water and arrows, elders stood at the gates with spears carved from wood. And always, above it all, the drums never ceased. King Hung himself rode at the front, his banner woven with symbols of the dragon and fairy. In the fiercest hour, when the enemy breached the line and the sky turned black with smoke, he climbed the sacred mound of Fong Shao and struck Ngok Loi 3 times. The first strike, called the Wind, it roared down the valley, tearing banners from their poles. The second strike summoned the rain. It fell in torrents, turning the battlefield into a river. The third strike awakened the storm. Lightning fell upon the enemy ranks, splitting iron like rotten bark. Those who survived fled north, their cries swallowed by thunder. When dawn returned, the land was quiet again. Smoke drifted over the fields, and the air smelled of wet earth and bronze. The people of Văn Lang knelt in the mud, exhausted but unbroken. King Hung looked toward the mountains and whispered, "Mother." Then he turned to the sea and said, "Father." A sudden breeze rose, gentle and warm. It carried the scent of salt and blossoms, and for a moment the king felt the world breathe with him. The drums struck once more, not for battle, but for remembrance. Their echoes rolled across the valleys, through forests, and out to the waves, where the sea answered in kind. The war was over, but something far greater had been born. A truth deeper than victory, older than memory. From that day, the people no longer called themselves just tribes of mountain or tide. They named themselves Con Rong Chao Tien, children of the dragon and the fairy. And every time thunder rolled across the land, they would pause, place a hand over their hearts, and remember that their ancestors were still speaking not from heaven, but from the very breath of the world. The rain did not stop for 3 days after the war. It washed the blood from the valleys, filled the rivers until they sang, and draped the mountains in veils of mist. The people said it was the sky cleansing the wounds of the earth, the tears of Aukur falling into the hands of her children. When at last the clouds broke, the sun rose clear and golden, painting the land with a light that seemed to begin everything anew. King Hung walked among the ruins of Fengshao, his feet sinking into the damp soil that had once drunk both fear and courage. Around him, the tribes rebuilt their homes, wood by wood, stone by stone, their laughter faint but determined. Smoke rose from new hearths, and the scent of boiling rice filled the morning air. Life had survived. He climbed to the highest hill overlooking the plain, the same place where he had first been crowned. From there, he could see the river gleaming like a silver serpent, and far beyond, the faint shimmer of the sea. For a long while, he said nothing. Then he raised his hands and spoke to the wind. "Mountain above, water below, your children have kept your vow. The storm has passed, but our hearts must remain awake. If we forget, we will fall not by sword, but by silence." The words carried across the land, stirring every listener's chest. Messengers were sent to every village and valley, bearing the king's decree, that a gathering would be held on the first full moon after harvest, to honor those who had died, and to renew the bond between the mountain and the sea. When that night came, people traveled from every corner of the realm. They came by boat, by trail, by river, carrying torches that glowed like fallen stars. The plain of Fengshao shimmered with light, a sea of fire stretching as far as the eye could see. At the center stood a great altar of stone, carved with dragons and spirals. Upon it rested the drum of heaven's promise. King Hung stood before his people, his armor left behind, wearing only the simple robe of a farmer. Beside him were elders from the mountains and fisherfolk from the coast, the two halves of a single heart. He struck the drum once, and the sound rolled like thunder over the crowd. Silence followed, vast and sacred. "Tonight," he said, "we remember who we are. Our blood is born of water and earth. When we fight, it must be for the land that feeds us, not for the pride that divides us. When we build, it must be with hands joined, not fists raised. If one day we forget this oath, may the drums fall silent and the rivers dry." Then he drew a blade of bronze, its edge glinting with firelight, and turned toward the mountains. "To the mother," he said, cutting his palm. Blood fell upon the ground and sank into the soil. "May you guard our strength." He turned to the sea. "To the father," he said, letting his blood drip into a bowl of salt water. "May you guide our courage." He raised both hands high. "To the children of both, may you never forget that the world was born of unity, not conquest." One by one, the chieftains followed, pressing their blood to the earth and water. 100 voices swore the same oath, their words blending with the sound of the wind. When the last voice faded, lightning flashed on the horizon, not in anger, but as if the heavens themselves had sealed the vow. From that night forward, the ceremony became sacred. Every year, under the same full moon, drums were struck in every village to recall the oath of the 100 Peaks. Even centuries later, when kings and dynasties rose and fell, the sound of those drums would still echo through the valleys, reminders of a time when gods and mortals spoke the same language, and love had built a nation out of storms. King Hung grew old, but never frail. his hair silvered like dawn light, yet his eyes still carried the flame of the first thunder. When he felt his time nearing, he called his children and said, "Do not weep. A dragon cannot stay forever upon the ground. The tide will call me home, and from there I will watch the mountains." They buried him on the highest peak of Feng Shao, facing east toward the sea. On the morning after his passing, the people awoke to find clouds shaped like scales drifting above the mountain and waves rising higher than ever before. The sea and sky had bowed together, and so ended the age of Hung I, the king who united the 100 tribes and gave voice to the heart of a nation. Yet even as centuries darkened and empires came and went, his oath endured, not carved in stone, but carried in the breath of every storm and the silence after rain. For as long as mountains stand and waters flow, the children of the dragon and the fairy would whisper it still. We were born of 2 worlds, yet belong to one. When the tide calls, we answer. When the mountain weeps, we return. Generations passed like wind through bamboo. The kingdom of Van Lang, once born of unity and song, now stretched far beyond the valleys where its first drums were struck. Towns grew into fortresses, villages into markets, and kings into legends. Yet where there is light, shadow waits patiently for its hour. The descendants of King Hung ruled in his name, each bearing his title as though his spirit still whispered in their veins. But with each new crown, the echo grew fainter. The drums of Feng Shao still thundered every spring, yet fewer hearts understood the vow that beat within them. Some struck the drums for pride, others for spectacle. The sacred became custom, and custom became habit. In the northern hills, iron blades returned not from the heavens, but from human greed. Neighboring tribes, once bound by oath, began to quarrel over land and tribute. Along the coast, the children of the sea whispered that the mountain people had grown arrogant. In the highlands, the children of the wind grumbled that the lowlanders had forgotten their roots. The balance trembled like a taut string ready to snap. Among the chieftains of the borderlands was a man named Thục Phán, son of a mountain lord and a river priestess. His eyes carried the dark gold of dusk, and his words, when spoken, could calm a crowd or divide it. He was young, but his mind sharp as a blade that had known both forge and fire. He watched as the old kingdom weakened under the weight of its peace, a peace too fragile, too proud. Thục Phán believed that the time of kings born only of blood had ended. "A nation is not inheritance," he said to his followers. "It is vigilance. When memory sleeps, power must awaken." Some called him visionary, others called him heretic. Yet wherever he went, the drums grew louder, as if recognizing something ancient in his voice. In those days, the rivers ran strangely high, flooding the fields before harvest. The elders murmured that the dragon was restless, that the sea sought to reclaim what the people had forgotten. Dreams spread through the villages, of waves climbing mountains, of a serpent coiled around the moon. And in the mountains, the shamans spoke of a voice in the mist, the voice of the fairy mother calling her children back to balance. One evening, Thục Phán climbed the sacred hill of Feng Shao alone. The wind tore at his cloak, and thunder pulsed in the horizon, faint but insistent. He knelt before the ancient altar of King Hung, its carvings worn smooth by rain and time. Lighting a flame of resin, he whispered, "Ancestor, the world you built is crumbling. The children of the dragon and the fairy no longer speak with one breath. If you still watch, give me a sign, and I will restore the vow you made to the world." The flame guttered, then flared blue. The air thickened with the scent of salt and rain, and through the haze came a whisper, not heard by ear but felt through bone. "The vow is never broken, only forgotten. To wake it, one must bleed truth, not claim it." When the wind died, the sky had cleared, and on the stone before him lay a single scale, pale as dawn light. Thục Phán took it in silence, knowing what it meant, the dragon's blessing and its burden. In the months that followed, he gathered warriors and scholars, builders and seers, not as conquerors, but as keepers of renewal. He spoke of the old promise, of the unity between mountain and sea, but not all listened. The descendants of Hung, grown complacent in their palaces, feared his words. To them, he was the storm come again. So the court sent messengers with silver tongues and poisoned gifts. Thục Phán refused both. "I do not come for your throne," he said, "but for your remembrance. Yet, if you guard forgetfulness like a treasure, then I will take it from you and give it back to those who remember who they are." The winds turned violent that year. Rivers rose, forests burned, and the drums of the land beat without command, as if some unseen heart beneath the soil had awakened. War was coming again, not from beyond the border, but from within the blood of the 100 eggs. And somewhere in the depths of the sea, the dragon stirred once more, his eyes opening upon a storm that had no master. In the high clouds, the fairy's shadow passed over the peaks, her voice lost in the thunder. For the first time since their parting, mountain and sea were about to meet again, not in love, but in reckoning. The rains did not stop for 40 days. Rivers burst from their banks, mountains bled mud into valleys, and thunder rolled without rest. To the elders, it was a sign that heaven itself had grown impatient. To Thục Phán, it was the sound of the old vow being reborn, violent, necessary, unstoppable. While the court of King Hung, the last, feasted behind stone walls, the land outside drowned. Villages starved, crops vanished, and fishermen were dragged to their deaths by waters too wild to obey. The king sent no aid, his counselors insisting it was a punishment from the gods. But Thục Phán knew better. When rulers forget their people, he told his followers, the gods send not storms but mirrors to show them what they have become. He gathered the tribes of the highlands and the deltas alike, summoning both mountain warriors and water farmers. Beneath a sky lit with constant lightning, they met upon the plain where once the first oath had been spoken. There, the young leader lifted the dragon's scale to the heavens. Its light cut through the storm, and the wind grew still. "From the father's blood and the mother's breath, we were born," he cried. "But now we are divided, stone against wave, brother against brother. If the mountain and sea cannot remember peace, then I will carve a new one." The tribes answered not with words, but with the beating of drums. The sound rose like thunder made flesh. Together, they marched toward the old capital, their banners carrying the symbols of the dragon and the fairy entwined once more. The last king of Hung met them not with humility, but with pride. His armies, golden and weary, filled the river plain. On the dawn of the 7th day, war erupted, a war between kin. The earth shook beneath bronze chariots. Arrows fell like rain. The mountain clans charged from the mist, their blades singing. The sea folk flooded the fields, their boats gliding where roads once lay. For 7 nights, the drums of both sides beat in defiance. But the rhythm was no longer one, it was fractured, echoing the divide within their hearts. On the 8th dawn, Thục Phán rode alone across the battlefield. His armor was drenched, his face streaked with mud and rain. Holding the dragon's scale high, he shouted, "No god will choose between you, only you can choose between oblivion and memory." Lightning split the clouds, striking the ground between the two armies. The earth cracked open, and from the fissure rose steam shaped like wings. A great shadow moved within it, neither dragon nor spirit, but something in between, vast and patient. The soldiers froze. Even the horses bowed their heads. Thục Phán dismounted, walked to the chasm, and cut his palm. His blood fell onto the wet soil, mixing with the floodwater. "Let this blood bind us," he said, "not as tribes, but as one land, Ow of the mountains and Lac of the rivers." The wind answered first. It circled the plain, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Then, from the horizon, the tide withdrew, and the rain stopped. The storm that had raged for 40 days fell silent. Both armies dropped their weapons. The king of Hung stepped forward, his crown tilting as he stared at the younger man. "You would unite us by your blood?" he asked. No, Thục Phán said softly. By ours. The old king knelt. Then take what I have forgotten and remember it for all of us. And so, without another sword raised, the age of Hung ended and the age of Aulak began. Thục Phán became An Duong Vuong, first of a new line, not a conqueror, but a restorer. He built his capital where mountain met sea, a citadel that mirrored the very balance of their creation. It was said that when its foundation stones were laid, the wind hummed the old oath, and the waters calmed around the shores. Under his reign, bronze gave way to iron, but the soul of the land remained the same. Fishermen still struck drums to call the rains, and farmers still whispered to the wind before planting. The mountain and sea learned again to breathe as one. Yet in the stillness after the storm, shadows always linger. Across the northern horizon, beyond the rivers and forests, foreign eyes watched the reborn kingdom with hunger. Empires were rising again, hungrier, colder, armed not only with iron, but with ambition that could swallow even myths. And so, while the people of Aulak danced to celebrate unity, a new storm was already forming beyond their sight, one that would test not their blood, but their soul. For as the fairy once said, balance is never given, it must be kept. The new kingdom of Aulak gleamed under the sun like a jewel, between two breaths of the world, one of mountain, one of sea. The red river wound through its heart like a vein of silver. Villages bloomed where the floods once devoured. People sang in the fields again, and the drums of Hung resounded from coast to highland, not for war, but for harvest. For a time, peace seemed to have found a home. King An Duong Vuong walked among his people without crown or guard, listening to their songs. He was not a man of ceremony, but of vision. He dreamed of a kingdom that would not just survive storms, but master them. We are the children of the dragon and the fairy, he said. Our walls must rise like the mountain and bend like the wave. But the land still remembered its old wounds. In the north, whispers told of empires gathering men who rode under banners of fire and wore iron that drank sunlight. They spoke of conquest as destiny, and of the south as their inheritance. And Duong knew that peace without vigilance was a candle left in the wind. So he climbed one night to the cliffs above the river delta, where the air smelled of salt and rain. The moon floated low, and the waves below glimmered like restless eyes. There he called into the darkness, "Father of the tides, mother of the clouds, your children have built anew, but I fear what comes from beyond the horizon. Show me the way to guard them, not through blood, but through wisdom." For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then the water began to ripple, circles spreading outward, though no stone had been cast. From the river rose a shape vast, slow, and ancient. Its shell bore the scars of centuries, carved with symbols older than men. Its eyes glowed faintly, steady as the moon. "Do you know me, King of Aulak?" the creature asked. And Duong knelt. "You are Kim Kwai, the golden turtle god messenger of the Dragon Lord." The turtle's gaze was calm, but deep. "Your fathers built with faith. You must build with knowledge. What they shaped from unity, you must defend from greed. The time of myth is ending, but its heart must live through your hands." "Tell me how," the king said. The river god extended a claw and drew a pattern upon the wet sand, spirals interlocked with waves, forming a fortress of living breath. "Build your citadel here, between mountain and tide. But beware, it will not stand unless the people remember why it was raised." Then Kim Kwai opened his mouth and placed before the king a golden claw, gleaming with light drawn from the depths. "Forge this into the heart of your weapon, not to conquer, but to remind. As long as you keep the oath, the walls will never fall." The turtle sank back into the current, leaving only ripples that glowed like molten bronze. The king bowed until the water stilled. At dawn, he gathered his builders, smiths, and priests and led them to the place the god had marked. They labored through rain and fire, through days so bright they burned their shadows into the ground. From earth and river stone, they raised a spiral fortress whose walls curved like waves and whose towers touched the clouds. They named it Koloa, the old spiral, the citadel of memory. When the final stone was set, and Duong placed the golden claw within a bronze crossbow, crafted by the kingdom's greatest smith, the moment it was fitted, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. Arrows fired from that bow flew farther than sight, striking only those who sought harm. The people rejoiced, calling it Northun the divine bow, the gift of the gods. Under its protection, Olak flourished. Trade reached the distant lands of the southern seas. Poets sang of mountains that dreamed beside rivers that remembered. But far beyond those horizons, the northern empires watched and waited. One night, as the king stood upon the ramparts of Koloa, the wind shifted. It carried the faint smell of smoke, not from hearths, but from the north. He turned his gaze toward that darkness and murmured, "The sea has given me strength, the mountain wisdom, yet even they cannot shield forever against the hunger of men." Below, the river lapped quietly against the citadel walls, whispering in a voice that was almost human. "All fortresses fall, my son. Only memory endures. Guard that, and you guard the world." And so the king stood in silence, while the first sparks of a new storm flickered across the northern horizon, a storm not of nature, but of mankind. Years passed, like patient waves against stone. Under King Anduong Vuong, Aulak had become a land of laughter and harvest. The citadel of Koloa spiraled outward with each season, its walls breathing like the coils of a dragon sleeping beneath the soil. The bronze drums no longer called for battle. They marked the time of planting, of rain, of peace. But even the most tranquil sea hides a current that hungers. One autumn, rumors drifted down from the mountain passes. Riders spoke of a vast northern kingdom whose armies marched under banners the color of ash. They said their armor gleamed like mirrors, and their words carried the chill of steel. Their emperor, young, fierce, and unrelenting, had already devoured a dozen realms. His gaze now turned southward toward the rich deltas of Aulak. The court whispered of war, but the king dismissed fear. "The walls breathe," he said. "They were blessed by the gods. As long as the oath endures, no tide can drown us." Yet, beneath his calm, unease coiled. Each night he walked the ramparts, feeling the wind shift from north to south, tasting iron in the air. Then came the envoy. He arrived alone, cloaked in silk the color of dusk, riding a horse that did not tire. His eyes were narrow, his smile precise, and his tongue a weapon honed on flattery. He bowed low before the throne of Aulak and said, "My lord, the Northern Emperor sends greetings and friendship. He desires trade, not conquest. He asks only for peace between our great peoples." And Duong studied him. "Peace," he said, "is a word men use when their swords are thirsty." The envoy's smile deepened. "Then perhaps, great king, you will let me stay to learn your ways, so that our emperors may drink from the same cup." The court, charmed by his grace and eloquence, welcomed him. They called him Thuy, a prince of the north, a student of the south. He brought gifts of silk, mirrors and iron blades, so fine they could cut a falling leaf. He spoke of art and philosophy, of unity between realms, and his voice carried the melody of truth, even when it lied. Among those who listened was Meet Shao, the king's daughter, gentle as dawn and curious as flame. She had grown within the walls of Koloa, hearing only songs of victory and peace. To her, Thuy's tales of distant lands sounded like dreams given voice. Soon, the court noticed her laughter followed him like the shadow of light, and Duong watched in silence. He saw the tenderness blooming between them and felt the first crack in the wall not built of stone. "A bridge between kingdoms," the elders murmured. "Perhaps this love is heaven's way of sealing peace." But the king's dreams grew troubled. In them, he saw the spiral walls uncoil into a serpent, devouring its own tail. Still, he said nothing. Love, he thought, was the one storm even kings could not command. Months later, Thuy asked to wed the princess. The court rejoiced. Even the farmers in the deltas lit lanterns for the union of North and South. Yet on the night of the betrothal feast, when the moon hung red and swollen, a messenger arrived, breathless at the gates. His clothes were torn, his face pale with terror. "The Northern Emperor is marching," he gasped. "Their legions cross the river at dawn." Silence fell over the hall. Michao dropped her goblet. It shattered like prophecy. Thuy turned, face unreadable, and for a heartbeat the torches seemed to lean away from him. Dung rose slowly. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "So the tide comes as it always must," he said. He turned to his generals. "Wake the drums, seal the gates, let the gods see whether their gift still remembers how to roar." And deep within the citadel, as thunder gathered over the northern horizon, the golden crossbow shimmered once more, the heartbeat of a nation preparing for its trial. At dawn, the earth shook with the march of iron. The horizon glimmered with the reflection of 10,000 blades. The sound of the northern drums rolled like thunder, devouring the wind. From the walls of Koloa, the people of Aulak saw what they had only heard in rumor, an army that moved like a single creature, armored in smoke and shadow. King Anduong Vuong stood on the highest tower, the Northun in his hands. The golden claw shimmered faintly, alive with divine fire. He drew the bowstring, and a light arrow cut through the air. Where it struck, the earth split, and a wave of flame scattered the invaders. For a moment, the people believed no force under heaven could touch them. But the enemy did not retreat. They regrouped, built bridges from corpses and shields, and pressed forward with the patience of the tide. Every day, they advanced an arm's length closer to the citadel. Every night, the king's arrows burned another stretch of their camp, yet the flames never seemed enough. In the halls of Koloa, Michao prayed before the altar of her ancestors. "May the gods protect my father," she whispered, "and spare the man I love." The two prayers, spoken in one breath, were the first fault in her soul and the last the kingdom could bear. Thuy, the prince from the north, stood beside her, his eyes heavy with sorrow and calculation. For months he had walked these halls, memorizing every turn, every secret. He had seen the weapon, the golden crossbow, and knew that as long as it lived, his father's army could not conquer. That night, when the torches dimmed and the king slept, Michao led Thuy to the armory. "You must leave before the morning battle," she whispered. "If my father finds you here when he learns of your homeland's betrayal, he will kill you." He took her hands in his. "Then give me something to remember you by," he said softly. Her heart trembled. She turned to the chest where the Northun rested and drew out the bolt carved from the turtle god's claw. "This," she said, "is the heart of my father's weapon. It will remind you of me." Thuy bowed his head, hiding the storm behind his eyes. "I will never forget." Before dawn, he was gone. When the sun rose, the army of the north advanced again, and Dung lifted the crossbow, but when he drew the string, the weapon gave no light, only silence. The divine fire was gone. Panic rippled through the ranks as arrows rained from the enemy walls. By nightfall, the citadel burned. Its spiraling walls, once a symbol of unity, now glowed red as molten bronze. The king fled with his daughter toward the southern sea, their horses galloping through fields of ash. Behind them, the drums of Aulak fell silent one by one, until only the sound of pursuit remained. They reached the coast under a bleeding moon. The waves roared, the same waves that had once carried the dragon's promise, and Duong dismounted and faced the horizon. "Father of the tides," he cried, "have I broken the oath?" The sea answered with a single flash of light. From its depths rose the turtle god, vast and ancient, eyes filled not with anger but with sorrow. "The vow was never yours to break," Kim Kui said, "but your bloodline has forgotten that love without wisdom becomes ruin." The king turned to Michao, realization dawning like a blade drawn slow. You gave them the heart of the bow." She fell to her knees. I did not know, father. I only love, he finished, his voice hollow. You loved, and so the kingdom died. The turtle god's voice rolled like thunder. She must pay the price, that memory may live. And Duan closed his eyes. Then let it be done. He drew his sword, its edge trembling, and whispered, May your soul return clean to the wind. When her blood touched the sand, the sea turned still. A white mist rose from her body, drifting upward like a torn feather. The turtle bowed his head. Now come, he said. The time of kings has ended. The sea calls you home. And Duan stepped into the waves. They rose around him gently, not as prison but as embrace. As the water swallowed him, the last light of his crown faded beneath the foam. Far inland, Thuy returned to the ruins of Ko Loa, clutching the golden bolt in his hand. When he found a strand of her hair among the ashes, he wept until his heart broke. Some say he walked into the well and never rose again. Others say he followed her ghost into the river. And so, love and kingdom perished together not by the will of gods, but by the frailty of men. The waves rolled once more against the silent shore, whispering the lesson that every age forgets. The mightiest fortress can fall, but a broken vow echoes forever. The morning after the fall of Ko Loa was eerily beautiful. Smoke rose from the plains like mourning veils, twisting into the pale sky. The river that once fed the kingdom ran black with ash and reflection. What remained of Aulak was not silence, it was memory, still breathing beneath the ruin. Fishermen from the southern villages said they saw the sea glowing red that dawn, as though the sun had drowned itself in grief. They spoke of waves parting for a single figure riding upon a turtle of gold. The king's crown floated away, turning once before vanishing into the deep. From that day on, no one dared fish those waters. They called it Bien Kam, the Silent Sea. The citadel of Ko Loa became a graveyard of spirals. Vines grew through shattered towers. Rain collected in the hollow drums that once called nations to unity. Travelers who wandered near swore they could still hear faint, echoing rhythms when storms approached, a heartbeat beneath the earth, the pulse of a kingdom that refused to forget its name. In the north, the invaders claimed victory, but it was a victory that tasted of dust. Their generals wrote to the emperor that the southern lands were won, yet none dared sleep within the ruins of the spiral fortress. At night, strange music drifted through the fog, the whisper of waves inside walls, the cry of a woman calling from beneath the earth. It was said that Thuy's ghost still lingered there. Villagers who crept to the old well saw his reflection even when no stars shone. Some claimed they heard his voice, a man begging forgiveness that never came. Others swore that when moonlight touched the water, it shimmered with two shadows instead of one. But the tale of tragedy did not end in mourning alone. Years later, wandering farmers found white stones blooming near the sea where Meetshau had fallen. Each bore the faint outline of feathers, and when the wind blew, they rang softly like distant chimes. The people took them home, carving them into charms of remembrance. From the heart of the princess, they said, was born mercy. Generations passed. Children were told not just of betrayal and fall, but of love's blindness and its price. The dragon gave us strength, said the elders, but the fairy gave us feeling. Forget either, and the balance dies. From the ashes of Aulak rose new names, new leaders, and new kingdoms. Yet every ruler who stood beneath the banners of the south carried the same burden, to guard what had once been lost. The legend of the golden crossbow and the princess's feather stones became more than sorrow. They became warning and prayer alike. And still, when the storms returned each spring, the people would light small lamps and set them adrift downriver. The lamps floated toward the sea, tiny stars returning to the dark. Fishermen whispered that the lights were not offerings but messages, letters for a king and daughter who still traveled the waves together, watching over their restless children. One night, many centuries later, an old monk stood on that same shore. The wind was soft, the tide low. He watched the lanterns drift and murmured, It is strange how tragedy fades into tenderness, how we turn pain into legend and legend into comfort. Behind him, his young disciple asked, "Master, do you believe they ever forgave each other?" The monk smiled faintly. "Look at the sea. It no longer rages, yet it never rests. That is forgiveness. It moves, but it remembers." He bowed to the horizon, where water met the shadow of mountains, and whispered a final prayer. "May the children of the dragon and the fairy learn from the silence of the sea. May they never build walls higher than their hearts, nor let love blind them to duty again." The waves carried his words out into the endless dark, where they mingled with 1,000 other prayers, and somewhere beneath them, deep in the silent sea, the turtle god stirred once more, guardian of memory, keeper of the vow. The sea rippled softly, as if answering. Then all was quiet again, save for the eternal whisper of water against stone, telling, retelling, and never forgetting. Centuries folded into dust, the ruins of Koloa sank beneath vines, and the rivers shifted their beds until even the oldest fishermen no longer knew where the walls had stood. The story of Ndung Vuong and his daughter became wind and song, told by grandmothers beside cooking fires, half believed, half dreamed. Yet memory, though buried, never dies. It waits, patient as the tide. The people who came after built new homes along the same red rivers, unaware they were walking on the bones of their ancestors. They dug wells that touched the old foundations and found shards of bronze shaped like feathers, bits of spiral stone carved by forgotten hands. Children played with them, not knowing they held the echoes of kings. These new tribes no longer called themselves Aulak. They took many names, spoke many tongues. Some worshipped the mountain, others prayed to the sea. But the wind that passed over their fields still carried the rhythm of the old drums. When thunder rolled, they felt it in their bones and bowed without knowing why. Far in the northern mountains lived a hermit, a man said to be older than his wrinkles, his hair the color of ash, his eyes clear as morning frost. He lived alone beside a spring that never ran dry. To those who found him, he spoke of the world as if it were a single breathing creature. "The mountain and the sea," he said, "still speak, though few listen. One day they will ask again who remembers their vow." Travelers carried his words across the valleys. Some took them for prophecy, others dismissed them as the babbling of a relic. But time moved, as it always had, forward, unrelenting. The northern empires rose and fell, leaving behind only broken fortresses and fields sown with ghosts. Yet through war and famine, a thread of endurance bound the people of the South, a stubborn faith in survival, a fire that refused to die. Generations later, a wandering scholar discovered the ruins of the spiral city. He found walls buried beneath the earth, stones curved in patterns that no human mind could fully explain. At their center, he unearthed the remains of a great drum. Its surface was cracked, its voice silent, but when he touched it, the air seemed to tremble. That night, he dreamed of a storm over calm waters. A woman of mist stood on the shore, her hair white as moonlight, her eyes endless with sorrow. Beside her was a man crowned in scales and shadow. Between them glowed a single feather, floating on the tide. When the scholar awoke, his hands were wet with salt. He fled the ruins and wrote of what he had seen. "The gods of this land do not die. They sleep in the hearts of men. When pride returns, they will wake again." And wake they did not as dragons and fairies, but as men and women who carried their essence without knowing. Kings who ruled with vision and fury. Poets who sang of rivers as if they were veins of their mothers. Soldiers who died whispering prayers to mountains they had never seen. Every time the land bled, someone would retell the old legend. "We are the children of the dragon and the fairy," they would say, and in that saying they remembered themselves. But the vow, like the drum, was cracked. The mountain and the sea had not spoken in one voice since the fall of Koloa. Their harmony had been broken by love's betrayal and by the forgetfulness of men. One night, as a monsoon gathered over the gulf, lightning struck the sea and the mountains at the same moment. The air split open, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the spirits stirred. Deep beneath the waves, the turtle god opened his eyes. In the high clouds, a whisper traveled the ridges. The bloodline still lives scattered, sleeping. It must be reminded. Rain poured across the land like the turning of a page. Somewhere in the delta, a child was born that night, with a birthmark shaped like a spiral, the same symbol carved on the lost drum of Feng Shao. His first cry echoed like thunder over the flooded plains, and though his mother heard only a child's voice, the earth beneath her trembled, as if answering. The old prophecy had begun to stir again, the vow was awakening, and in the silence between thunderclaps, the world seemed to whisper once more. The story is not over. The rains did not stop for 7 nights after his birth. Lightning coiled above the delta like veins of a living god, and the river swelled until it kissed the walls of every house. The midwives said the boy was born between 2 breaths of thunder, the exact moment when storm and calm exchanged dominion. They named him Lak Min, meaning light of the lost river. He grew under the constant hum of water and wind. His village lay where the old Red River bent like a question mark, a place the elders called Kan Dong Hong Ten, the nameless field. Here the soil was rich, black with the ash of forgotten wars. The farmers joked that even ghosts could grow rice there. From childhood, Lak Min was different. When other children feared the rain, he stood barefoot beneath it, eyes wide, listening. He claimed the thunder spoke in syllables he almost understood. Once, during a storm, he vanished for hours. When they found him, he was standing at the edge of a flooded meadow, tracing spirals into the mud with his hands. "It's breathing," he told his mother. "The earth is breathing." As he grew older, the village began to change around him. Strange things followed in his shadow. Wells overflowed without rain. Fish swam upstream out of season. When he laughed, birds gathered on rooftops. When he wept, the clouds darkened. Some called him blessed. Others whispered the word omen. By the time he reached manhood, the elders could no longer deny what they had seen. One of them, the last to remember the old tongue of the Bach Viet, took him aside and said, "The gods left this land long ago, child. But sometimes, when the world forgets itself, they return not as storms, but as people. Be careful what you awaken." Lak Min bowed, though confusion clouded his heart. That night, he dreamed of a city made of spirals, walls curving inward like shells, towers shaped like waves. At its center stood a woman of mist, her face pale and kind, and beside her a figure crowned with light. They looked at him, and he heard a voice, not with his ears, but in his blood. "You bear what was broken. You must remember for those who cannot." He awoke, trembling, salt on his lips, the scent of sea wind filling the room. Months later, wanderers arrived in the village monks, with eyes that gleamed like reflections, carrying bronze bells engraved with dragons. They claimed to come from the mountains, following visions of a storm child who could speak the language of the elements. When they saw Lak Min, they fell to their knees. "The sign," one whispered. "The spiral lives again." They told him of prophecies older than stone, that one day, when the land forgot its vow, the spirits of the dragon and fairy would choose a vessel of both earth and water to mend what centuries had undone. "The mountain and the sea have been apart too long," said the eldest monk. "The rivers rebel, the rains refuse the fields, the world grows deaf to its own heartbeat. You must listen for it again." He did not know whether to believe them. He was only a farmer's son, barefoot and bewildered. Yet deep inside, something ancient stirred a pulse, answering another from far away. That night, he went to the riverbank. The water was dark, restless. He knelt and whispered, "If you truly know my name, show me." The current shifted. A ripple spread outward, slow and perfect, forming a spiral. Then, from beneath the surface, rose a faint glow, not light, but memory. For an instant, he saw the reflection of a golden turtle shell, the shimmer of scales, and a woman's face dissolving into mist. When the vision faded, a single feather floated to the shore, white, unbroken. He picked it up, and the wind spoke softly through the reeds. "Begin where the drums have gone silent." At dawn, he left the nameless field. The villagers watched him walk toward the horizon, where mountains met the sea. None tried to stop him. They sensed, as all who live close to the land do, that destiny had returned to walk among them. And as Lac Min disappeared into the mist, thunder rolled once more across the valleys, not in wrath, but in remembrance. Somewhere beneath the waves, the turtle god opened his eyes, and the voice of the fairy whispered through the clouds, "The vow breathes again." The path to the mountains was older than the rivers. Lac Min followed it barefoot, guided by the hum beneath his feet, a pulse that seemed to beat in time with his own heart. The land was changing. Villages lay half-drowned by erratic floods, while others cracked and wilted in drought. The seasons no longer obeyed their songs. It was as if the mountain and the sea were quarreling again, and the world trembled between their anger. He journeyed for many moons, through forests dense as memory, through plains where ancient stones jutted like bones of forgotten giants. Everywhere he went, people spoke of strange omens, fires that burned blue, rivers that flowed backward, birds circling without rest. When they asked who he was, he simply said, "A listener." In a fishing hamlet at the mouth of a river, he found a shrine half swallowed by vines. Within it stood a cracked statue of the turtle god. The villagers no longer prayed there, fearing misfortune, but Lac Min felt the air hum around the idol. He knelt and laid the white feather upon its feet. "Great keeper of memory," he said, "if the world once made a vow, tell me where its echo hides." The wind stilled. The water beyond the shrine rippled once, and the statue's eyes gleamed faintly gold. A voice rose not from stone, but from within him. "The echo lies where it began, between the breath of mountain and the sigh of sea. But to reach it, you must walk through silence, through what men have forgotten." When he opened his eyes, the feather was gone. In its place lay a bronze scale, shaped like a spiral. He left the hamlet at dusk, the scale warm in his palm. For 3 days he walked inland, following the river upstream. The air grew cooler, the water thinner and wilder. Finally, he reached a place where the current split into 100 small streams, weaving through cliffs carved by time. The locals called it Ngan Hui Thur, the 1,000 breaths, for the wind there never slept. On the 3rd night, lightning crowned the peaks. He climbed toward the summit, his body aching, his spirit pulled upward by something he could not name. When he reached the top, he found an ancient circle of stones, each engraved with the spiral mark he had traced as a child. At its center stood a basin filled with rainwater, shimmering like a mirror. He knelt beside it. "If you are listening," he whispered, "I have come to remember. The Viz is 5, it has the passes day and of the Tarakas and the Fies and Delas sea as time, because 6 in back it is." The water trembled. His reflection changed not into his face, but into the eyes of a woman, soft, luminous, infinite. Mist rose around him, and her voice filled the air. "Child of the spiral," said Auker, "blood of my blood, breath of my breath. The world remembers through you." Lac Min's heart pounded. "Why me?" he asked. "I am no king, no hero." "Neither were your ancestors when they first loved and broke the world," she replied. "You are not chosen for power, but for listening. The mountain has grown proud, the sea resentful. They no longer hear each other. You must remind them." The mist swirled, and through it appeared a figure of light and shadow, the Dragon Lord himself, his form vast as the horizon. Thunder rolled with his voice. "You carry both our hearts," he said, "but the balance will not return through prayer or weapon. It must be felt. Walk where men have stopped feeling. Speak where silence has ruled." The 2 spirits circled him, mountain wind and sea mist entwining until they became one breath. Then the voices faded, leaving behind only the whisper of rain and the gleam of the bronze scale in his palm. Lac Min bowed to the empty air. "Then I will go," he said. "I will remind them." As he descended the mountain, dawn broke, a soft red light spreading across the horizon like a wound healing. In the valleys below, rivers shimmered with new clarity, as though waiting. The world seemed to hold its breath, sensing that the old song of creation had been hummed once more. He did not know where the path would lead, only that it would wind through kingdoms and ruins, through men who had forgotten what they were made of. But as he walked, he felt the pulse of both water and earth guiding each step. And somewhere beyond sight, deep beneath the waves, the turtle god smiled. The listener has begun his journey. The vow has found its voice again. Lac Min's path carried him down from the highlands into the valleys, where mist and memory slept together. The people here lived quiet lives, tilling what little soil remained between floods. They no longer built drums or sang to the rivers. Their prayers were brief, half-hearted, spoken only when the sky grew dark. One evening he reached a village, hidden between cliffs, a place where the air smelled of wet stone and smoke. The children did not play. The adults moved like shadows, eyes dulled by years of struggle. The fields were grey with salt, a sign that the sea had risen too far inland. When he asked for shelter, they looked at him with suspicion. "You can stay in the storehouse," said an old woman finally, "but do not speak of gods here. We have buried too many to still believe." That night, Lac Min sat outside, listening. The wind crawled through the valley, thin and restless. He felt a faint rhythm beneath the soil, so soft it could have been the echo of his own heartbeat. But it was older, deeper, like a drum muffled by earth. He asked the old woman about it. Her eyes flickered. "The drum?" she said. "That is no drum, traveler. It is the curse of our ancestors. Long ago, before the floods, we struck the earth to call for rain, but the rain came too much. Since then, we do not play the drum. We let the silence feed us instead." The next morning, he went to the center of the valley where the sound was strongest. There he found a mound of stones, covered in moss and carved with spirals faint from centuries of wind. At its heart lay a hollow depression filled with rainwater, a natural drum of the world. He knelt, placed his hands upon the surface and whispered, "You have not been forgotten." The ground trembled. A low tone rose from beneath his palms, deep and sorrowful, as though the earth itself were sighing after a long sleep. The villagers heard it and came running. Some fell to their knees, others screamed. The old woman shouted, "Stop! You will wake the floods." But Lac Min did not stop. He struck the surface again, gently, rhythmically, the pattern that had haunted his dreams since childhood, the pulse of the 100 eggs, the vow of the first oath. The valley shook. Water burst from cracks in the stone, not in fury but in release. The salt that had poisoned the fields melted away, replaced by fresh streams that ran clear and bright. The villagers stared as green shoots rose, where nothing had grown for years. When the trembling ceased, Lac Min stood breathless, his hands dripping with earth and water. "It is not a curse," he said softly. "It was waiting to be remembered." The old woman approached, trembling. "Who are you?" He looked up toward the peaks where the clouds parted. "A listener," he said again, "and a messenger between what was and what must be." That night, the villagers lit fires for the first time in decades. They brought out old drums from their storerooms, cracked, dusty, half-forgotten relics, and struck them hesitantly. The sound rose and rolled through the valley like a returning heartbeat. Some wept, others laughed, without knowing why. As the flames flickered, Lac Min watched the sparks rise toward the stars and thought of the voices that had sent him here. The mountain and sea had not spoken for centuries, yet through the hands of mortals their rhythm had found life again. He stayed until dawn, helping the people rebuild the Embark, teaching them how to listen for the right kind of silence, the silence that breathes. When he finally left, the old woman pressed a small stone into his palm. It was carved in the shape of a spiral. "Take this," she said. "Wherever you go, remember that even the forgotten can be healed." He bowed, tucking the stone beside the bronze scale and white feather. As he walked away, the morning light spread over the valley, and the sound of drums followed him, faint but steady. Far away, on the edge of the sea, the waves began to move differently, not in anger, but in rhythm, and high in the clouds, thunder rolled once, then faded into a hum almost like approval. The journey was only beginning, but the world had started to listen again. After leaving the Valley of Drums, Lachlan followed the river east. Its water was clear and restless, winding like a serpent searching for home. Villages grew fewer the closer he came to the lowlands. The air changed heavy with salt, thick with the scent of mangrove and memory. The river spoke to him in fragments. At first it was only the murmuring of current over stone. Then came whispers, words half-formed, as though the water were trying to remember a language it had once known. Sometimes he thought he heard laughter, sometimes the faint sob of waves breaking against a lost shore. One dusk, he reached a bend where the water widened into a lake. There, in the orange light, the surface shimmered like polished bronze. He felt drawn to it, the way a flame draws a moth. Kneeling by the edge, he touched the water. The ripples spread outward in spirals. His reflection blurred, and when it returned, it was not his face he saw, but that of a man in armor, bronze, shining with rain. Behind that figure stood a city of curved walls and towers shaped like shells. Koloa, alive again. He heard the echo of drums, the cry of soldiers, the roar of fire. Then another image. A young woman kneeling in the sand, her tears turning into white feathers. Above her, the sea boiled with lightning. He gasped and pulled his hand back. The vision vanished, the water calm again. "Why show me this?" he asked the river. A voice rose from the depths, faint, melodic, sorrowful. "Because memory is not gone, only drowned. What was broken still calls your name." The current thickened. From beneath the water, light emerged, swirling shapes that formed into the image of a great turtle. Kim Qui's voice echoed through the still air. "The mountain remembers your breath, child of the spiral. Now the sea must remember your name. Go where the river ends and the tide begins. There lies the last silence." The vision faded, but the current did not release him. A wave of dizziness swept through his body, and when he opened his eyes again, night had fallen. The moon was bright, the stars sharp as blades. He saw footprints, his own leading away from the water into the forest. Though he had not walked them, he followed the path. It led him to an ancient tree whose roots coiled into the earth like sleeping serpents. Beneath it sat an old fisherman, his nets torn, his lantern dim. "You have come far," the man said without turning. "Too far, maybe." Lachlan bowed. "Do you know this river?" The old man chuckled. "Know it? I was born from it. And when I die, it will take me back. The river dreams, boy of all that it has carried and all it has lost." "Then tell me," Lachlan said, "why it shows me the faces of the dead." The man lifted his head, and in the lantern's glow his eyes gleamed, gold, ancient, kind, endless. "Because they are not dead. They are waiting." Before Lachlan could speak, the wind rose. The old man's form shimmered like mist and dissolved, leaving behind only the torn net and within it a single bronze fish scale, identical to the one he already carried. He understood then. The river was not a path, it was a mirror, and through it, the world of the living and the memory of the divine brushed edges like tides meeting at dusk. At dawn, he set out again, walking where the river grew wide and shallow, until its voice changed from whisper to sigh. The land flattened into reeds and sand, and ahead stretched the sea endless, shining, alive. As he stepped into the surf, the waves recoiled, not in fear, but in recognition. Each pulse that touched his skin hummed with words he could not yet understand, but he felt their meaning. "You have brought the mountain's echo, now carry it to the depths." He closed his eyes and breathed in the salt wind. For the first time since his birth, he felt whole part of both sky and tide. Behind him lay the valley that remembered. Before him, the sea that had forgotten. And in between stood one man, chosen not by blood, but by listening. The waves drew him forward, as if the ocean itself had been waiting centuries for this single step. The dawn unfurled in sheets of gold across the horizon. The sea was calm but alive, its surface shifting with breath-like rhythm, as though it too waited to exhale. Lac Min stood ankle-deep at the edge, where river met tide, feeling both the pull of the deep and the weight of the earth behind him. Every wave that touched his skin carried a whisper, fragments of forgotten songs, broken syllables of prayers once sung by the children of the dragon and the fairy. He stepped farther in. The water rose to his knees, his chest, his shoulders. When it reached his throat, he spoke into it, his voice muffled and strange. "Father of the tide, I have come with your mountain's breath. I bring the sound of the drums you left behind. Will you hear your children again?" For a heartbeat, the world was still. Then the sea convulsed. The wind tore through the sky, and the surface erupted in spirals of light. From the depths emerged the turtle god, his shell gleaming like molten dawn, his eyes ancient as the first storm. Around him the waves bowed, falling silent. "The listener returns," said Kim Kwai, his voice rippling through air and water alike. "You carry the echo of your mother's breath. Speak, and let the sea remember." Lac Min bowed deeply. "The mountains have spoken," he said. "Their streams run dry, their roots tremble. They do not hate you, Father, but they have forgotten how to forgive. The world splits again, and mankind lives between its wounds." Thunder murmured across the horizon. The turtle's gaze softened. Long ago, the dragon turned inward, and the fairy turned away. Their love became pride. Their pride became silence. I guarded the memory until men forgot even how to ask. You would ask again. Then the sea must be reminded that it once loved the mountain. He lifted one claw and touched the water. The waves curved inward, forming a wide spiral that glowed from within. "Step forward, child of both. Take the tide's memory into your heart. Carry it until the mountain breathes it back." Lac Min hesitated only a moment. Then he stepped into the spiral. The world exploded, in color and sound. He sank without drowning, falling through layers of water that shimmered like glass, through ruins of coral shaped like ancient towers, through clouds of fish that moved as one. In the deep, light became memory. He saw the past, the dragon lord rising from his palace of pearl, the fairy mother standing on mist, their union burning brighter than the sun. He saw the 100 eggs, glowing in the dark, pulsing like stars. He saw floods and wars, love and betrayal, the long story of his blood, written across the face of the world. The images faded, leaving only darkness and a single sound, the heartbeat of the sea. It pulsed once, twice, then merged with his own. When he opened his eyes, he was standing on the shore again, drenched but breathing easily, as if the ocean had filled his lungs with air. The bronze scale on his chest now glowed softly, and every wave that touched his feet bowed low, as though recognizing one of their own. Kim Kwai's voice lingered in his mind. "You are now the echo of the sea, as you were the echo of the mountain, but the vow cannot live in one alone. Seek the place where wind and stone speak together. There, the world will listen once more." The sea withdrew, leaving behind a single line of foam that pointed west toward the mountains. Lac Min followed it, walking barefoot over the wet sand. Each step seemed to draw a new current behind him, as though the tide itself were escorting him inland. Behind him, the waves struck the shore, once, twice, then stilled completely, not in death, but in peace. The sea had remembered. Far out where the horizon blurred, a shimmer appeared not of sunlight, but of two figures rising from mist, one cloaked in scales, the other in light. They watched him go, their voices blending with the wind. "He walks where we once could not. Through him, our love breathes again." And as Lac Min disappeared into the brightening dawn, the sea exhaled a long, gentle sigh, the sound of memory returning home. For 7 days and 7 nights, Lac Min followed the direction of the retreating sea westward, toward the spine of the land where clouds slept against stone. The rivers ran beside him like companions, murmuring in voices newly awakened, and every bird seemed to fly in the same direction, as though the world itself anticipated his arrival. The farther he went, the quieter it became. Villages grew sparse. The forests thickened into ancient cathedrals of green, where sunlight fractured into gold. There were no drums here, no songs, only the whisper of wind through the trees. It was a silence heavy, not with peace, but with waiting. On the 7th dusk, he came upon the first mountain, a wall of rock black as ink, veined with silver streams. The air was cold and tasted of rain. He began to climb, his bare feet gripping the slick stone, his breath mixing with mist. The higher he ascended, the more the mountain seemed alive. The ground pulsed faintly beneath his steps, and the wind carried low tones that sounded almost like words. By the time he reached the summit, the moon had risen, a pale eye, staring down from eternity. The world below stretched in silver shadow. There, upon a plateau carved by time itself, stood a circle of standing stones. Each bore the spiral symbol he had seen since childhood, though now they shimmered with faint light, as if stirred by his presence. He stepped into the circle. The air thickened, the wind stopped. For a moment, all was utterly still. Then the ground rumbled, and from the heart of the mountain came a deep, resonant voice. "Who disturbs my rest?" "I am Lac Min," he said, his voice trembling. "Child of the spiral, the sea remembers. I have come to awaken you, as I was commanded." A pause. Then the stones glowed brighter, and a shape began to form from mist, massive, ancient, half-human, half-stone. Eyes like burning amber opened, and the air filled with the scent of wet earth. "The sea remembers," the voice repeated, softer now. "Then the wound is ready to close." "Father of the mountains," Lac Min said, bowing low, "the world trembles between you and the sea. The rivers run wild, the skies break their rhythm. The vow that once bound you is fading." The mountain spirit studied him. "Do you think the vow can be restored? The sea and I loved once, but love became pride, pride became silence, silence became scar. Even gods cannot mend what love has broken." Lac Min stepped closer. "Perhaps gods cannot, but those who carry your blood can." The spirit's laughter was like thunder rolling through stone. "And what are you, child, but a flicker of flesh?" He held up the bronze scale, which now shimmered with both golden and silver light. "A flicker that remembers." The spirit's laughter died. The mountain trembled, as though considering. Finally, it spoke again, not in challenge, but in grief. "Then listen, listener. The heart of the mountain is buried deep. Its song has not been heard since the day the fairy left. To awaken it, you must give something back, something taken. What must I give?" The spirit leaned forward, its vast face lit by moonlight. "Your voice." "My voice?" "Yes. The world has too many voices that speak and none that listen. Give up your words, and you will hear the mountain's song. Only then can the sea and I be bound again." Lac Min's heart clenched. Without his voice, he could no longer call the world to remember. But he knew, deep in his bones, that this was the price. He knelt, placed the bronze scale at the spirit's feet, and whispered his final word, "Remember." A gust of wind roared through the circle, tearing the clouds apart. The stones glowed so brightly that the air turned white. His voice left him not as sound, but as light, spiraling upward into the sky like a ribbon of flame. When the brilliance faded, the mountain was still. Lac Min stood in silence, the world around him newly immense. He could no longer speak, but he could hear every leaf's tremor, every grain of sand shifting under moonlight, the heartbeat of the earth itself. From deep within the rock came a single note, low and pure, the first sound of the mountain remembering its own soul. Lac Min smiled, tears streaking his face. He had lost his voice, but the mountain had found its song. Far away, the sea stirred. The waves began to rise, not in anger, but in recognition. The two voices, one of stone, one of water, reached toward each other across the night. And for the first time since the beginning of the world, the mountain whispered to the sea, "I have heard you." The dawn that followed was unlike any before. It came not as light spilling across the horizon, but as sound low, resonant, infinite. The mountain sang. Its song began in the roots of the earth, a slow pulse that shook the trees and scattered mist from the valleys. Then the rivers caught it, carrying the rhythm down their winding paths until even the farthest delta quivered with life. The villagers who lived along those banks awoke to find the water shimmering gold. They heard a voice rising from beneath the current, deep as thunder, soft as prayer. It said no words they knew, yet every heart understood. The world remembers. High above, Lakmin stood at the summit, eyes closed. His lips no longer moved, yet his heart vibrated with the song. Every beat of his pulse was part of the mountain's rhythm, every breath a syllable in its new hymn. The silence inside him was no longer empty, it was full. He raised his hands, palms open to the east, where the rivers met the unseen sea. The mountain's song flowed through him, and the wind took it farther. Across the plains, the air changed. Clouds swirled, low and silver, gathering weight. On the distant coast, the waves stilled, as if listening. Then, for the first time in ages, the sea answered. The reply came as rain sheets of it descending like threads of silk, binding earth and sky together. Each drop carried a tone, each gust a harmony. The storm that should have been destruction became music, the duet of mountain and tide, the marriage of heaven and earth reborn. In the valleys, people left their homes, standing barefoot in the rain. They lifted their faces to the sky, tears mingling with the downpour. "It's singing," a child whispered, though no one had taught him the word for miracle. Deep beneath the waves, the dragon lord stirred. His great coils glided through the dark like ribbons of molten light. He rose until his crown touched the surface, and there he beheld the reflection of the mountains shining through the storm. He spoke into the wind, "My heart returns." From the clouds above, the fairy mother descended, her form woven from mist and light. She reached her hand toward the sea, and where her fingers touched the water, it glowed. "And mine forgives." The two voices met in the air, merging into one note so pure it stilled even thunder. Every creature, every leaf, every grain of sand held its breath. At that moment, the boundary between gods and mortals dissolved. The sea rose not in flood but in embrace, touching the mountain's feet with gentleness. The rivers no longer fought their way to the ocean, they glided, content, the earth sighed, and a warmth spread through all things, quiet and endless. And in the center of that harmony stood Lakmin, arms outstretched, his body trembling with light. The bronze scale on his chest burned with both gold and silver fire. His silence was now a bridge, his heart the meeting point of all creation's breath. The spirits' voices filled him one last time. "The vow is whole again. What was torn by pride is mended by remembrance. The song will live as long as hearts can listen." He bowed his head. A single tear fell onto the stone and turned to crystal, glowing softly before sinking into the mountain. The light began to fade. The clouds parted, the rain thinned to mist, and the sea withdrew, leaving peace behind. When the villagers climbed the mountain days later, they found no man there, only a circle of stones pulsing faintly with warmth. In the center lay a single spiral carved into the rock, fresh and gleaming as though made that morning. When the wind blew across it, the mountain hummed a sound like a heartbeat, eternal and kind. They built a shrine there and called it Din Lang Nur, the summit of listening. And every year, when the rains came, the people would climb the paths with offerings of rice and song. They struck their drums in the same rhythm the mountains once taught them, and the echoes rolled down to the sea. The waves would rise slightly, answering with gentle foam. The covenant endured, for though Lac Min had vanished into legend, the world had learned again what he was born to teach. That silence is not emptiness, but a promise waiting to be heard. That the mountain and the sea are one breath, carried in every human heart. And that when we listen, truly listen, the gods themselves remember how to love. Seasons passed. The rains no longer drowned, and the droughts no longer cracked the soil. The mountains breathed steady. The rivers ran like veins of living silver. And though no one had seen the listener again, his name spread like fragrance through the land, not as the name of a man, but as a prayer. In the valleys, children learned the rhythm of the old drums once more. They were taught not to strike them in anger or fear, but in harmony, 3 beats for the earth, 2 for the sky, 1 for the sea. Farmers sang as they planted, and when they harvested, they bowed toward both mountain and tide. The people called this Le Giao Hoa, the rite of reunion. Years turned to generations. The story of the listener became a legend carved into wood and stone, painted on temple walls. Some told that he was taken by the gods to dwell among the clouds. Others whispered that he had become the voice of the mountain itself, speaking through the wind. But those who listened carefully, truly listened, swore they could still feel his pulse beneath their feet when thunder rolled across the horizon. One evening, centuries after the vow had been renewed, a young woman climbed Din Lunga. She was a scholar, a traveler, her hair tied back with a ribbon of river grass. The world below her shimmered in twilight fields green as jade, rivers coiling like silk. She carried no offering but a small drum carved from the wood of an ancient banyan. At the summit, she placed the drum upon the spiral stone and whispered, "I have studied every scroll, every carving, but none tell what became of you. Did you die, or did you become the wind itself?" The air was still. Then, faintly, a tremor passed through the ground, not an earthquake, but a heartbeat. The spiral stone glowed beneath her hand. The woman closed her eyes. In that instant, she felt everything: the warmth of the mountain beneath her, the cool breath of the sea beyond the horizon, the faint laughter of rivers winding through the valleys. She saw in her mind's eye the face of Lac Min, young, serene, luminous. He stood not as a man, but as a shape of light, half cloud, half tide. His eyes held no words, only the gentleness of someone who had found peace. "Are you still here?" she whispered. The wind stirred, carrying a single tone. Low and deep, the sound of a drum struck far away. Then came a voice, not in her ears, but in her heart. "I was never gone. Every time you listen, I am born again." The woman smiled through her tears. She struck the drum softly once, twice, thrice, and the sound rolled down the mountain like a living wave. From village to village, people paused and looked up. They heard the echo and smiled without knowing why. Farmers put down their tools. Children stopped their games. Even the sea seemed to hush for a breath. And then, from somewhere deep and unseen, the drums of the world answered. They beat from the north, the south, from every coast and valley, from temples and boats, from hearts that had forgotten and hearts that had always known. The sound wove itself into a single rhythm, ancient, joyous, boundless. The vow was alive again, not as legend, but as pulse. That night, when the moon rose, the rivers shone with light. In their reflection appeared the forms of a dragon and a fairy, not gods of conquest, but guardians of memory. They smiled at each other, then at the people below, and their voices joined as one. "As long as love remembers, we are eternal." When dawn came, it was neither mountain nor sea that claimed the first light. It was the horizon itself, glowing in perfect balance. The wind carried no command, no lament, only peace. And from that day forward, the people of the land that would one day be called Vietnam spoke a single truth to their children, a truth older than kings and younger than breath, that they were born not of gods and myths alone, but of listening, of balance, of the promise between the mountain and the sea. And when the first child each year was born during the spring rains, the elders would whisper into its ear, as they once whispered to Lac Min, "You are the child of both storm and silence. Remember, the world lives when you listen." Time moved gently now, no longer as a storm carving valleys, but as a river shaping generations. The world that Lac Min had left behind blossomed into a land of abundance, its mountains whispering to the sea as naturally as breath. The people called their country Viet, meaning to move forward, for they believed motion was the truest proof of life. But the people also remembered. In every village, beside every field, a stone spiral was carved, simple, small, placed in the ground like a seed. Children were told, "This is where the gods listened." And on nights when the moon was full, families would gather around it, striking drums not for worship, but for memory. The rhythm was no longer battle or prayer, it was gratitude. The sea gave its fish freely, and the mountains gave their timber and herbs. The rivers ran clear, their courses steady as old songs. Trade grew between distant tribes, and temples rose from stone and shell, curving in the shape of waves. These temples did not hold idols, only spirals, bronze drums, and water that never stilled. The priests called them Na Lang Nunga, the houses of listening. From the highlands to the coasts, the people learned to read the language of their land. When thunder rolled, they did not cower, they whispered, "The Father speaks." When mist hung low, they smiled, "The Mother dreams." Children were raised to hear meaning in silence, and silence in song. It was said that once each generation, a child would be born who could truly hear the heart of the world. The mark of the spiral appeared faintly at birth, sometimes on the wrist, sometimes between the brows, sometimes beneath the ribs, where the heartbeat lived. Such children were not feared but cherished, for they were reminders that the vow still breathed. In one village near the confluence of 3 rivers, a young boy named Min Hai was born with such a mark. When he laughed, the rain began. When he slept, the crickets stilled. His grandmother, who had lived through a lifetime of storms, said softly, "He carries both calm and thunder." As Min Hai grew, he would wander the marshes alone, speaking to reeds, frogs, and waterbirds as though they were kin. Once, during a long drought, he placed his hand on the cracked soil and closed his eyes. Moments later, the clouds gathered, and rain fell gently for 3 days. The villagers called him the Whisper of the River. But not all was peace. Beyond the lands of Viet, other realms stirred. Empires rose again, greedy and restless. They saw the fertile deltas, the steady waters, the shimmering ports, and they called them treasure. Rumors reached the temples, of northern lords sharpening blades, of merchants who spoke of conquest with smiles too calm. At first, the people did not worry. They trusted the mountains and the sea, their ancient guardians. But the elders remembered history's cruel pattern. Peace had always been the brief breath before pride's return. One night, a storm unlike any seen in generations swept across the coast. Waves the height of mountains battered the cliffs. Lightning cut the clouds into ribbons. When dawn broke, the ocean had receded far beyond its usual edge, leaving behind 1,000 white feathers scattered across the sand. The priests trembled. "The mother weeps," they said. That same morning, Min Hai awoke from a dream. In it, he had seen a man of light standing between a dragon and a mountain, his hands outstretched, his voice silent. The man turned to him and mouthed a single word, "Listen." When Min Hai opened his eyes, the spiral on his wrist burned faintly, and from the sea came a distant, low hum, like drums rolling beneath the horizon. The vow had never ended, but now something older than memory was stirring again, not in wrath, but in warning. For every age of balance, the world must test whether its children still remember how to hear. The sea was restless for weeks. Its tides shifted without moon or season, as though something vast beneath its skin had begun to turn again. Fishermen spoke of currents that hummed like voices. Mountain dwellers felt tremors that came not from quakes but from breath. deep, steady, alive. Min-Hai wandered the coast each evening, feeling both fear and recognition. The spiral on his wrist glowed faintly when he stood near the tide. He sensed that the peace of his world was no longer simple. It had become fragile, stretched thin like the silence before thunder. One night, as the villagers slept, the horizon flared blue-white. Lightning did not fall from the sky. It rose from the ocean. The waves towered, yet did not break. Within their moving walls, something vast shimmered scales of gold, eyes like suns behind water. And from the mountains beyond the valley came answering fire, red and slow, rolling downward in clouds of dust and light. The Dragon Lord and the mountain spirit had awakened. The villagers fled, terrified, but Min-Hai did not. He stood barefoot at the water's edge, hair whipped by salt wind, heart pounding to the rhythm he had learned from the old drums. He could not hear words, only emotion, the pain of reunion, the ache of recognition too long denied. "Why do you come?" he whispered into the roar, his voice trembling. The air thickened. The sea parted just enough for a great head to rise from the depths. The Dragon Lord, his scales duller now, scarred by centuries. His voice shook the sand itself. "Because the vow wavers again. Your people listen, but they do not hear. They speak the words of balance, yet their hearts chase dominion." From behind, the mountain rumbled. A woman's shape of stone and mist formed from the cliffs, the spirit of the highlands, voice low as thunder beneath earth. "They have forgotten to kneel. They thank the rain but build walls against it. They call the wind holy, yet trap it in ships of greed." Min-Hai fell to his knees between them, the child of both elements, just as Lak-Min had been before him. The world crackled with fury and sorrow, the air trembling between creation and ruin. He raised his arms. "Great ones, if you destroy them, you will destroy yourselves. The vow was never a law of power, but of mercy. Let me remind them." The sea hissed, the mountains groaned, the dragon's eyes burned like molten suns. And what will you give, listeners' blood? What can a single mortal offer to silence the pride of empires? Min-Hai swallowed his fear. He touched the spiral on his wrist. "What I have always had the gift to listen. Take my hearing if you must, but let the world be spared." The mountain spirit looked to the dragon, her expression softening. The storm slowed. Rain turned to mist. "He speaks as the first listener once did," she said. "Perhaps the world still carries our memory." The dragon lowered his head. "Then we shall test it." He exhaled a stream of light that coiled around Min-Hai, burning without pain. It entered his chest, and the sound of the world, wind, rain, heart, wave, all fell away. The boy gasped, then smiled through the silence. He could hear nothing, yet he felt everything, the pulse of the sea, the sigh of the cliffs, the quiet tears of his people. He turned toward the villages, where fires burned along the coast as people fled. He walked into the storm, his body aglow, every step leaving spirals of light in the sand. When he reached the central square, he struck his hand against the great bronze drum that had not been touched for generations. No sound came, yet every soul heard it. The invisible rhythm rolled across the land, through rivers and roots, through every heart that had once forgotten how to listen. The fishermen dropped their nets, the merchants ceased their counting. Even the children went still. For one breath, the world remembered. Then came stillness. The storm stopped. The sea lowered itself back into calm. The mountain exhaled smoke that became cloud. In the hush that followed, every living thing felt the same truth, that silence itself was sacred. The dragon and the mountain spirit withdrew, their light fading into horizon and mist. Before vanishing, their joined voices echoed within Min-Hai's mind. "You have passed the test. The world remembers again until it forgets." He collapsed upon the wet earth, smiling faintly as dawn returned. Around him, the people approached, kneeling beside his still form. The spiral on his wrist glowed once more, then dimmed, as though its work were done. And far beyond sight, Beneath both stone and wave, two great beings bowed their heads not in triumph, but in peace. The vow had been kept, but not by gods. By a child who had learned the oldest truth of all, that to save the world, one must listen even when all is silent. The morning after the storm was still and gold. The sea shone like a polished mirror, and the mountains, clear of cloud, seemed closer than ever before. The air itself felt new, rinsed, clean, quiet, reverent. It was as if the world had been reborn, yet dared not speak too loudly, for fear of breaking its own perfection. The villagers gathered around Min Hai's body. He lay where he had fallen, the spiral on his wrist faintly glowing, his face peaceful. Though his chest no longer rose, his lips curved, as if he were still listening to something the rest of them could not hear. They buried him on the hill overlooking both river and sea, the place where the first drums had once been carved. Around his grave, they planted reeds and stones in a spiral pattern, each one bearing a single word, etched in old script. Lang Nung, listen. That night, as the stars emerged, the people lit small lamps and set them afloat upon the calm water. The flames drifted out into the bay, like tiny souls returning home. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was full, as if filled with the breath of the gods themselves. Far beneath the waves, the turtle god stirred from his long watching. His golden eyes opened, and he saw that both the mountain and the sea were at rest. So, he murmured, the vow endures again not through power, but through remembrance. Then he sank once more into the deep, where his shell gleamed faintly, like a sun forgotten by time. Years passed, and the hill of Min Hai became a shrine. Travelers came from every corner of the land, farmers, poets, scholars, even kings, to sit in silence there. Some left offerings, others just tears. Many swore that when the wind passed over the reeds, it made a sound unlike any other, a heartbeat made of wind and water. In time, the people no longer called Min Hai a boy or a hero. They called him the last listener, not because no one could follow, but because his silence had taught them all to hear. Generations followed, and history folded as it always did. Empires rose, dynasties fell, languages changed, names forgotten. Yet one thing endured. Before planting, before sailing, before war, the people would always stop to listen. To the mountain wind, to the sea's murmur, to the stillness within their own hearts. Even when centuries blurred the faces of the gods into myth, the story of the vow remained. It said that long ago, a dragon and a fairy had fallen in love, their children born from 100 eggs, that their love had broken the world and remade it again. That, from their sorrow, came a promise. As long as their descendants could listen, the world would never drown nor dry. And so, in the land that became Vietnam, listening itself became sacred. The hum of insects before rain, the whisper of the tide on a still morning, the song of bronze when struck at dusk. Every sound was a memory, every silence a bridge. Centuries later, when scholars wrote of their nation's birth, they began not with kings, not with battles, but with this legend, the legend of the listener. They wrote that the heart of their people was born not from conquest, but from balance, not from shouting into the void, but from hearing what the world had always been trying to say. And even now, when storms sweep across the coast and thunder rolls from mountain to mountain, some claim they can hear it still a rhythm, soft but certain, echoing through the rain. 3 beats for the earth, 2 for the sky, 1 for the sea, the ancient vow, alive as ever. And in that sound, between the crash of the wave and the whisper of the wind, the voice of Lac Min, of Min Hai, and of every child born from the 100 eggs seems to murmur softly. Listen well, for in every silence, the world begins again.